Hello, and welcome to Framed and Bound, a podcast that covers movies set in the literary world. This week, we will be talking about the 1976 film The Front, directed by Martin Ritt, written by Walter Bernstein, starring Woody Allen, Zero Mostel, Michael Murphy, Herschel Bernardi, and Andrea Marcovicci. This is a film about the blacklist that was also made by a number of people, including, I believe, both the director and writer, who were themselves blacklisted. I'm going to quote from Roger Ebert's review of the film, released at the time of its release. For a plot description, Allen plays a New York delicatessen clerk whose highest ambition early in the film seems to be keeping his fingers out of the meat slicer. He is approached by an old neighborhood buddy with a problem. The buddy is a communist sympathizer and has been blacklisted. Suddenly, it's impossible for him to sell scripts to television. The buddy makes a proposal, he'll write the scripts, and Woody confront for him, pretending to be the real author. This week, on this week's episode, I am joined by Melanie Anagnos. She is the author of the novel Nightswimming, so thanks so much for tuning in. I have to say, The Front is a movie that I've been aware of for many years, but this was my first time watching it. So I'm curious for you. What was your first exposure to it? What was your introduction to it?
So I watched it when it first came out, and I would probably, looking back, probably went because Woody Allen was in it, because in the 70s he was so popular.
Yeah,
And I mean, we'll circle back to the fact that in the 70s it was really not all that well received.
yeah,
And when I was discussing, a film from the 70s about writing, it came to mind, and I watched it again, and the more the more I was off the screen reading about it after I saw it again, the more I liked it,
yeah.
if that's fair.
I mean, it's fascinating the fact that when the end credits roll, you see just how many people, both behind the camera and in the cast, had themselves been blacklisted. I knew about Zero Mostel, but I don't think I was aware of, just the sheer amount of other people in the cast, which was just staggering, but also, kind of. I'm not going to say explained a lot, but sort of made it very clear, like how a lot of the people involved with it had such an affinity for the project.
But I think the credits are probably one of the more powerful moments in the film.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I it's an interesting project. It's an interesting project to watch too, because I feel like it's kind of not predates, but there was this. I mean, I know that, and I know Woody Allen sort of as a writer and performer kind of came from this milieu, but I feel like there's a whole almost subgenre of people who were involved in 50s television who went on to make, films or plays or projects about it. I'm a big fan of My Favorite Year, which was a couple of years after this. A few years after that, I can remember going to see Neil Simon's play Laughter on the 23rd Floor, which I think also draws from this. So it was interesting kind of looking at this as also, there's one really powerful sequence where you see the live television, the production of, I think, the first screenplay or the first script that Howard has submitted under his name, and you see the production of it, and then you see this family all sitting together watching, the black and white television as it goes on. And it struck me as a really effective way of just showing the extent to which television as a medium was really just captivating people, and how much how it was kind of this way for theoretically very sort of well-crafted highbrow work to come to a mass audience. So
Yeah, I like that scene a lot too, and I think it really brought to focus how the Red Scare tied into the rise of television as a medium,
yeah,
because suddenly, I don't, it was so new then and so captivating. As you said, this family is sitting around the dinner table, not speaking, they're focused on the television. And to, I guess, the culture of the government. That's if you already believe that there is a Red Scare and there were, disproportionate communist sympathizers within the entertainment, community, that's going to generate that kind of, response, because it seemed a little bit silly when you would see FBI agents following screenwriters.
Yeah, yeah. It's also an interesting, I mean, in the realm of kind of in this podcast's purview of films about writers, it's also an interesting film in which the protagonist is himself not a writer. I mean, you know, yeah, there is that one point where he's starting to give some of the blacklisted writers who he's the front for notes on kind of making their projects better, but he himself has, as far as I can tell, no, he's not for whatever reason, I think I just assumed he was going to himself have been a frustrated writer, and it's kind of like he has really no ambitions like that at all. It's sort of the Michael Murphy character, who I primarily know through like Robert Altman's films, and some of his colleagues who are really the people who are and at least based on what we see of the reactions to their work, it seems like they are in fact genuinely talented. But yeah, it's an interesting film in the sense of yeah, having a main character who is almost more characterized by what he doesn't do or what he isn't than what he is, yeah, which I feel like we can probably come back to as well. But
Yeah, again, because so much of what I took from the film came from research that I did afterwards, because there was so much there that you wanted to know, and I think originally Martin Ritt and Walter Bernstein, the writer, had wanted to just do a direct film, a direct drama about their experiences. They were both blacklisted, and the studios wouldn't touch it, so they decided to do a comedy, and that's where they decided to use the front as the main character.
yeah,
And one of the things I found was so interesting, because when you're watching the film, the Woody Allen character is so clearly not capable of doing this writing. But in reality, Walter Bernstein, he had used a front that they knew, the studio producer, they knew, but they were getting scripts, very, inexpensively, so they didn't care.
yeah. It's interesting. Like there were two things that I don't think the filmmakers didn't hammer home, which I appreciated. But one of them was just there's a scene at a party with the television studio executive and Howard, and there's the sponsor who's very very keen to make sure that there is nothing remotely controversial, and none of the actors are controversial, and he's essentially given this you know remarkable degree of creative control over the project, and kind of the fact that the executive says at one point, like, well, we just kind of we don't want to make waves. We don't want to, we could probably push back, but why would you bother? And that really just becomes this sort of pernicious theme that runs throughout it, which I found both both very chilling, and also, this was far from the only period in history where that's happened, and the way that sort of conformity becomes almost self-enforcing was deeply unsettling, I would say.
And I think, to that point, the fact that in the 70s, where freedom of expression was so prevalent and so much enjoyed by writers and directors, that this film just really didn't land. I find it so interesting. I find that McCarthyism is sort of like this shorthand for blacklisting, but it's really it's sort of almost out of context. Like
Yeah,
there's really or no context around it. People just use the term and they don't really understand that lives were deeply not they were impacted, but it was repression was just so much a part of the government, so influential, but it was a limited industry, so people just didn't notice it.
yeah. I mean, I keep going back to the Michael Murphy character. I think at one point says, like, well, he's like, I haven't been told I'm blacklisted. I just know I'm blacklisted. I know I'm blacklisted because I'm not getting any more work. Uh,
Right.
and that just sort of that again, that sort of all-consuming, pervasive of kind of mood that just kind of overwhelms everything, which again is a lot more unsettling than anything else. Or the the whole thing with Zero Mostel's character, where he is, the scene where he's going to perform in the club, and you just realize he's getting less, his career is being affected because he's getting less and less money. And even, the $300 that seemed like such a huge, cut for him, he's not even getting that. Um, which, yeah,
That really happened
yeah.
to Zero Mostel. That was Walter Bernstein had driven him to the Catskills,
Oh, wow.
and that actually happened.
Oh, man. I have to say, like, I mostly knew him as an actor through his work in The Producers, and uh, the supporting role he had in The Hot Rock, in both cases where he's playing these very larger than life characters. But man, I was just enormously moved by the work that he does here, where he's still playing this very big, over the top character, but you get the sense of that as his public face. I mean, there's the scene of him after he's performed where he's dripping with sweat. There's all of these things where just his character just has this, this sense of desperation, and really just this really tragic grandeur about him that I was just absolutely, absolutely just stunned by. Like, I always thought of him as a great comic actor, but just like, this is just a great performance. Full stop. I was, yeah. And I
Oh,
think if I'm going to go back and rewatch this again, I think that for me, far and away, I mean, and this is a film that has, Michael Murphy is great. I was not expecting to see a young Danny Aiello show up, which I was just like, oh, hey, I know that guy. This does not really have a shortage of terrific actors in it, but man, just every time he was, and the scene in which he eventually uh commit suicide at the end of the film, where it's just, it's coming, and just the tenderness that he plays his last few minutes. Oh God, it's so good. Like, yeah.
given that he was, within that the role, so over the top, how underplayed that last scene was just breathtaking, I thought.
Yeah. And there's this kind of running sense of just I mean, that the scene where he's in the office with the investigator, and is not quite begging him, but kind of, but there's that sense, but there's really a sense of sort of palpable desperation throughout. I mean, Howard, especially when he's hitting up his more successful brother for money, and almost all of these characters are in some way desperate for something, and have just kind of been placed under, in these impossible circumstances. Uh, yeah,
And again, it goes back to how little was known about that because it was such a very discreet industry.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I know I didn't see it, but I know there was the film a couple of years ago about, and I am absolutely blanking. Was it Dalton Trumbo, that Bryan Cranston was in, which I have sadly not yet seen. Although, given that this is a podcast about writers, I should probably do that before long. But yeah, it's still, it really goes into, like, yeah, what about blacklisting, and the fact that to some extent, on the other side of it, I mean, there were, Zero Mostel, I believe Sterling Hayden was also blacklisted, but it's kind of like, because we're on the other side of that, it's kind of, I'm a big fan of the Long Goodbye, that Sterling Hayden is fantastic. And so it's kind of like, you can kind of, it's, I don't know, maybe as someone who was not around, you know to witness that firsthand, but it's kind of like, also, I you can see that it was not, at least for some people, they were able to work again at some point after it, but so it doesn't feel as devastating. But it's, yeah, it's like, what work could have been done, and also, as the film shows, like, the blacklisting there, like, there are certain characters who I think are portrayed as, you know at least dedicated in their principles, but it's also as simple as, hey, did you sign a petition once? Did you donate some money to a cause? Which is hardly, you know uh revolutionary sentiment. You know,
I think it became very complex within the industry because I think her Sterling Hayden did speak to
mm,
he cooperated, and you know your initial reactions, what one's initial reaction would be to be upset about that, but then the writers were able to have fronts where an actor could not.
yeah,
So I think within the industry there was still a lot percolating.
yeah,
For instance, I think Trumbo wrote Roman Holiday, and it wasn't until the 2000s that he actually got credit for that.
yeah,
So, like, I mean, how many years was that going on? And, like, there's still drama within the industry about the blacklisting.
yeah. I mean, it's been God, probably 20 years now, but I remember when Elia Kazan was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Oscars, and there was still there were clearly people who were not, I think for good reason, not happy about that.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, I think Ed Asner, Nick Nolte refused to stand.
yeah, I kind of want to get to the Woody Allen of it all because it is interesting to me that it was interesting to me. This is one of the handful of times I've seen Woody Allen act in a project that he did not write and direct. And it was interesting to me to watch him play a character who isn't, I mean, who is a little bit more, I think, of an anti-hero than, you know, at the same time, as this, he was playing more, you know, more likable protagonists at least. I mean, there's a whole point where I'm watching this where I'm like, this is not a particularly, he's not a particularly nice guy. He's not a particularly ambitious guy. I mean, it sounds like he's kind of a compulsive gambler. His, you know, he falls in love with a woman from the network who he is essentially lying, who for most of the relationship he is absolutely lying to her about, his ambition, about what he's capable of doing. And it's really not until the final scene of the film that he finally takes a stand for something, and you know, it's kind of for the most roundabout. It's less of like taking the most principled, you know, stand against the blacklist possible, and just sort of almost being angry at the logic of it as opposed to the principle of it. I mean, he sort of seems to have doesn't seem to particularly care for communism or capitalism in either way. He's really more out for himself, which I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think the setup in the beginning because it's of him as a gambler, because then when he is confronted in the committee with like, hey, we know that you were, taking bets and can use that against him that, I thought that, tied in very well. But I also got the impression that this was about Hecky Brown.
Yeah,
That was why he finally said, enough.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I can definitely see that. God, yeah. Um, it's also just interesting to see like some some parallel universe in which Woody Allen just has a career more as a character actor, more than anything else. Because it was interesting to see. It was a film with a lot of really small. I mean, the fact that he goes from this very small apartment to, assumably, just taking 10% of a writer's, the 10% commissions are adding up very well, given that you see him in this very opulent apartment, and he's beginning to get these bespoke. You see him seen with him in a tailor's office getting a bespoke suit made, and I mean, the fact that he is dressing very well over the course of the film was also a thing to see.
I, I was definitely doing the math there and thinking like how much money is involved in this
Yeah,
because he was certainly like definitely going up a couple of income levels.
yeah. And when he's at his girlfriend's apartment later on, hers, assumably she was making fairly decent money at the network, and like her apartment is like a fraction of the size of his, which although it also, I mean, there was to jump back to something you were saying earlier, there's the film is what it is, but I would like to see maybe a movie that also riffs more on the the front as something, as kind of a lie that everyone is aware of, where everybody knows that there's a front, but it allows everything to kind of look smoothly. Because there's one scene, I think, where the network executive is talking to the investigator, and he says something like he's the only writer I have. Um, because at this point, assumably everybody else who could write at this level has had some suspicious, has had something in their past that would bar them from working. And so, yeah, I mean,
I think
yeah,
I think, and again, I mean, you sort of had to go outside of the film and really do a lot, some research because it was so interesting. But I do think, like for example, there was a writer, Michael Wilson, and he wrote Bridge on the River Kwai, but he didn't get credit. But I think the writer was like French speaking who didn't speak English, so of course they knew.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and presumably the fact that the studio the executives are noticing that there is this writer who is turning in a vast number of high quality scripts at just an astonishing rate, you would think it would probably have set off some kind of alarm bells, and just clearly someone's made the decision to just not look too closely at this and just kind of let everything come in.
Yeah, and I think that was a bit of a disconnect because I think when the film was reviewed, I think it was Roger Ebert was saying, well, nobody would believe that Woody Allen his character would be, capable of doing this. So it made it sort of incredible because it was,
Yeah,
even though it was a comedy, it was a black comedy, and there was
yeah,
some certainly drama. But I think that misses the point. The point was that, of course, it wasn't credible,
yeah,
and that just implicated the people who were taking the scripts anyway.
yeah. I also loved the sequence where, in sort of the milieu of New York, Howard as a writer is this very, you know, becomes this very attractive person as a successful writer, and then when he and Hecky go to the club for Hecky's booking there, like all of a sudden, like all of the women there who Howard is approaching are just like, one of them, he tells her he's a writer, and she kind of just wants nothing to do with him. And there's the I think my favorite exchange, or at least the funniest exchange in the film, was during Hecky's set, where there's the dark-haired woman next to Howard, and she asks him what he does, and he says, "I'm a dentist," and she says, "Professionally,"
Yeah,
which
that
is
was good.
just such an amazing, I laughed harder. I mean, this isn't really a laugh a minute film, but I think laughed harder at that than anything else, just because it's such a it's, but coming back around, though, the moments where I don't know if you also have this, but I have a tendency sometimes, if I am being asked about something I am writing, to just freeze up. Inevitably, this is, have you read anything good lately? And my brain goes cold. And sometimes the
Right.
like, well, tell me about this. And so there was a way in which Howard's absolute refusal to answer any questions about, his own writing process, and just freezing up, weirdly almost seemed very genuine, in a way that, like, you know, people would I can easily see someone go like, "Oh yeah, clearly this guy is a genius, because he doesn't want to reveal his method," in a way that seemed very oddly realistic to me, in a completely, strange way.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with that. When anybody asks me what I'm reading, I have no idea. Even if the book's right there and I just
Yeah,
put it down.
yeah. No, absolutely. Like, I have said multiple times, like, can I email you? Can I text you? I absolutely can give you a list of recommendations, as long as you don't put me on the spot. But if you put me on the spot, I am going to just, you know, I'm going to be absolutely useless in that situation.
But yeah, one of the things that I did want to circle back to a little bit is the fact that this was, this came out in the 20 years after the incidents, right? After
Yeah.
after the committee. And it just seemed like it was ancient history.
Yeah.
It was recent history, but it could have been medieval history because at that point you had, in terms of journalism, you had Bernstein and Woodward, and you had Last Tango in Paris. I mean, there was just so much freedom, and the idea that you could have this kind of, repression under the First Amendment was just unthinkable.
Yeah. I think, it's the opening montage of kind of footage of the 50s with the Sinatra song playing. I mean, I think it's there's I took that to be a little bit of a satirical jab that it's, you're seeing a lot of really the after effect, there are veterans there who have had limbs amputated and everything, and you have, you know, uh but it is an interesting thing that it is a period piece without a hint of nostalgia about it.
And I mean, I think the reason it came out, obviously the reason it came out was because that they were ready to tell their story and it could finally be told because they had pitched it to studios for a long time and they wouldn't accept it. But one of the ironies is that the 50s were very much romanticized. At that time, you had Happy Days, you had Laverne and Shirley, you had Grease, and you know, it was looked at as this wonderful time.
Yeah. It's what else? I mean, was this the the writer and director was, I mean, you've done, I think, more research into this than I have, but did they end up addressing the blacklist in other ways, or was this kind of intended to be their kind of one big statement on it?
I think, well, Martin Ritt, he had done a lot of films like Sounder. He did Norma Ray. So he was always dealing in that area of, society and, where society was crushing people.
Yeah,
Was it, in the, blacks in the Depression, mill workers, Norma Ray was about unions. And so he was doing, he was doing that, but this was the first time it was directed, head on.
yeah,
And I think in all film, because I think you had, Arthur Miller did The Crucible, but that was obviously very, very, like a sideways, view of the witch trials.
yeah. It's also, yeah, and I think it's also interesting that, yeah, the some of the other 50 sort of looks back at like 1950s television have not did not necessarily grapple with the politics quite as much. I mean, this is obviously overtly about it, but yeah, it's a bleak movie. Like it's a really sad movie for most of its running time. And yeah,
And I, looking back at it, I keep coming to the point of why was it so overlooked? I mean, there's not a lot of reviews on it. It really didn't get a lot of, and it should have been very much like it's a cautionary tale
yeah,
from very recent history.
yeah, yeah. I would agree. Um, it's one. This is one thing about, and I can only really respond to the film as it was. What did you think of the decision? I mean, we hear Howard and the network uh, executives talking a little bit about some of the some of what he's writing. I mean, I think there's a reference to, one of the pieces is set during the Holocaust, and one of the sponsors doesn't want there to be a gas chamber. It has to be, a firing squad instead. But I couldn't tell, and I'm still thinking about this, of would I have enjoyed it more if we could have seen a little bit more of, kind of what some of these projects were that were so good. I mean, because we really only have, the fact that obviously the two characters from the network that we meet are pretty enamored with it, and Hecky seems to be very happy with, with with the lot with the parts he's been given. But I was also wondering, like, there were times where, I mean, it's a short, it's 95 minutes, so it's kind of like, would it have been stronger if we could have gotten a sense of like what were in these scripts that, first one friend and then several friends and acquaintances of his were giving. I don't know, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I mean, I think the tightness of this, worked to its benefit. But for a film about, again, for a film where the written word is so central, uh it's, there were times where I would have liked a little bit more in that direction as well.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think that might be because they were so close to the project that they knew so much, and it almost hurt the audience because the audience didn't know certain things.
Yeah,
Like, we were talking about the family watching TV. But that's a bit subtle.
yeah,
How powerful TV was becoming and how frightening that was. And they knew that, but it really wasn't conveyed to the audience as strongly as I think it could have been.
yeah. I also, I mean, again, I kind of go back and forth on Howard as a, I mean, he's an interesting protagonist, but again, I mean, I've seen Woody Allen films from before this and after this where he has been, can lean into more of his comic persona a little bit more and be a little bit more charismatic. And I mean, really, in this, he is just such a, there are times where he just feels almost like he is not that kind of a screen presence here. He is just, I mean, which also helps explain why he's the perfect front in that he is, just this very quiet, you know, unobtrusive guy. But there were a few times where did, you know, I I did feel like that maybe for me at least kind of did not always work terrible. Like I understood it at an intellectual level, but I didn't necessarily it didn't always click for me on a more emotional level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I actually found the Alfred Miller character, his friend that
Yeah,
has the ulcer, to be very interesting, and I wanted to know a bit more about him.
yeah,
But as you said, it was a really tight script. It was 90, 95 minutes, so it was very, very focused.
yeah. There were also I thought some interesting things having to do it didn't really go there was not a lot stated there, but the fact that you have Woody Allen, his character, and Hecky are both presumably Jewish. Michael Murphy's character and the woman who from the network who Howard embarks on a relationship with feel more waspy. The uh, the investigator I took seemed kind of, for lack of a better word, Catholic coded. The fact that his middle initial is X, which kind of, at which again, none of this was ever stated outright, but there were a lot of interesting, you know, just below the surface, there was a lot of interesting dynamics, and clearly the filmmakers had thought about this and weren't just like, here are these people. It doesn't matter anything about their backgrounds. Like this was like this is a very these characters have these very particular backgrounds for a very particular reason, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, and I also thought it was very New York at that time because that's who you
Yeah,
would have seen there.
yeah. It's the kind of thing where like I absolutely appreciated just the fact that this was clearly shot the exteriors were shot on location, and and it's also the funny thing about this was shot 20 years after the fact, and it's kind of like, yep, you could still just there are plenty of blocks or Radio City where if you just put a camera there, it looks exactly, this is absolutely a believable stand-in for the city of 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I hadn't changed, and the same people were working in the industry
Yeah.
to that.
I so I'm curious. I know you your new novel is set in the 70s. So I'm curious, like, did you, when you were delving into the blacklist, does that have any bearing on the project you're working on now, or the
It doesn't really relate to the project I'm working on now. What I do, I write crime fiction, but it did relate to certain themes about what like the 70s, as I said, was a much freer time and what was changing, and my project has to do with women's roles. So I would look at something like, for example, the Stepford Wives, which is
Mhm.
in a way a look back on the 50s, and
Yeah,
again, on a misogynist culture, and depicting it that way. So I thought that the front was bookended a little bit with the Stepford Wives.
yeah, that sort of enforcement of conformity and the yeah, yeah,
and I don't think either of those projects were meant to take on Happy Days, but in a way they did.
Yeah. Yeah. And trying to think, I'm just looking over my notes to see if I have anything else. I loved the, I mean, again, the jokes in this were not Fast and Furious, but I mean there's the one line about kind of subscribing to to Hecky at one point when he's being grilled by the investigator says like, well, I subscribed to the Daily Worker, but I never read it. And
which which I could see.
yeah,
I think a lot of people were, I mean, I think that's exactly what happened. And I think that was what happened to Elia Kazan, where he basically said, like, I got sucked into this. And one of the reasons he spoke out to the committee was he was very against what the communists were doing, which is they were taking young, impressionable people in, and he saw what was going on in the Soviet Union. But I think that somebody like Hecky absolutely represented those people who were naive, who were just went along for the ride, whose friends were involved, so they went to a meeting once and somebody named them.
yeah,
I think that
yeah,
was very, very common.
yeah. It's a lot, and it's yeah, it unfortunately I feel like still for all that it is very much a film set when it is set in the early 50s, it is also it's also very much like that sense of conformity and that sense of you know certain things just being easy the morally cowardly route ends up being a much easier way to go than perhaps than the more morally upstanding route.
I wonder though if, because the writer and the director both wanted to do this for a while as a straight drama, and the reason that they didn't was because the studios wouldn't allow it. And I wonder what would have happened if it would have been more. I don't know if you've ever seen The Lives of Others, the
Oh
German
yeah,
film,
yeah,
which was so powerful and such a wonderful film, and so much about the same, well, I mean, it was obviously a fully totalitarian state,
yeah,
but you're still having these writers being tormented by the police.
yeah, yeah. For all that I mean, there was something of a thriller aspect to that, and this, I mean, there really isn't any sense of suspense except perhaps the one scene where Howard kind of has to is being told to do rewrites on the spot, and but even that is handed off pretty well. Or the scene where he's going to be being given a script and the writer who is handing it off to him is under surveillance, so he kind of waves him off. But yeah,
Yeah, because the FBI was definitely, I mean, they were at the funeral watching him, watching the funeral because he was afraid to attend, but he did want to go,
yeah,
and he was seen there. So you did have these moments, but I wonder how it would have been viewed, and if it would have been more woven into the culture if it had been a drama.
yeah. There's a scene, maybe might have been in the bookstore, where it's the two of them talking in the foreground, and in the background you can just see like the one younger FBI guy in the suit just like clearly just standing and watching the whole thing happen, which was yeah,
And actually, one of my favorite scenes was in the hospital because that was really where they actually talk about what's happening to them,
yeah,
and about it wasn't about, because they were saying, well, why don't you name names? They already know the names, and they was, like you're not hurting anybody, you're not outing anybody, and their point was it's not about naming names, it's about control. If they can force us to name the names, and I thought that was so much more powerful than much of what you saw on the screen.
yeah. I mean, and the fact that even at the end, when Howard is given the opportunity, where it's just like just say Hecky, like he's dead. You literally there is nothing else you can do, and that's yeah, and he won't do that. Which yeah,
Right. And I think it's about one, it's obviously being loyal to him, even though he's dead. But it's also about what you can and can't be forced to do from your government.
yeah,
And I think he just said no.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that was an interesting scene. I wonder if you thought that scene paralleled the end of McCarthyism with the famous statement, have you no sense of decency?
yeah, yeah. Well, that yeah. I mean,
with
the
a little sharper language.
yeah, it was it. I thought it was, for a film that's been very realistic. I did the fact that when Howard Walk goes to storm out of the hearing, everybody else is frozen, and he's the only figure in motion, which I thought was uh, a nice touch. And I went a little bit back and forth where Howard's kind of like, well, just if one person stands up to them, we can do that. The whole thing will fall, will crumble. And I'm kind of like, that seemed maybe a little bit naive. But it also, but I think it also illustrated how this system was clearly just built on a lot of people just agreeing to take the easy route and not be not stand up for anything. And yeah,
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because at what point, like, certainly there were a handful of people who said no. There was
yeah,
people who went to, like Dalton Trumbo went to jail
yeah,
with nine other writers. But would it take the entire industry? Like, how many before you're actually standing up
yeah,
and being impactful?
yeah,
Because otherwise you're just going to jail and the industry obviously went on.
yeah. And I mean, I don't know. It's been interesting to sort of see kind of some. I don't necessarily want to say things like that nowadays, but I feel like some of the things that have come up about like American studios, I will say, moral compromises to get inroads in the Chinese film market with things like, it seems to have come out in recent years that like one of the reasons Richard Gere has been in fewer and fewer movies is because of his Tibet advocacy for Tibet. Or I think one of the head of Disney at the time that the Scorsese film Kundun was made has kind of dismissed the making of that entirely. And it's I I'm not I think we're a long way from a second blacklist, but it also feels a little bit like you can still kind of see this doing the easy thing as opposed to the right thing, in a lot of different forms. You don't have to look very hard to see it.
No, I mean, it's very fragile, and that's why it was so sad that McCarthyism has just become this sort of shorthand term for blacklisting, but we don't really go any deeper than that.
Yeah,
And I think it's more than a cautionary tale. It's part of our culture, and it's very much seen as just a small piece of like, oh well, they were so unevolved then. It was the 1950s. They didn't know what was going on, as opposed to it's very much a threat anytime.
yeah, agreed. I am about at the end of I took some notes and I jotted some things down, and I think I've kind of covered everything that I wanted to. Is there anything more about the film that you wanted to bring up?
No, I mean, I thought the film was, as I said, I thought it was a good film. I liked it better the second time I saw it. I think I got a little bit more out of it. I do go back and forth as to whether it would have been a little bit stronger had it not been a comedy, but I understand why they made it a comedy.
Yeah,
And yeah, it made me think about a lot of things that I probably hadn't thought about. And
yeah,
and I think it's very interesting that it landed in the 70s the way it did. And it should have been a bookend to All the President's Men. I
yeah,
mean, they both came out in 1976.
yeah,
And
yeah. It is absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, it came right out in that period, and it's not necessarily people you would associate with sort of golden age of 70s US filmmaking. But yeah, but I feel like it is ripe for kind of rediscovery. And you know, it's the kind of film where I know I want to do a little bit more digging now and see like, are there are there contemporary filmmakers who have cited this as an influence? And is there are there unexpected places where this might come up? Which I would really, yeah, because I feel like it definitely has the not the potential for it, but the quality for it.
I agree with you. I think that it is a film that time has definitely it's benefited from stepping back
Yeah.
because what I saw it didn't really make a an impression on me the way it did. Although I will say again that the closing credits were very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I do remember those very specifically.
Yeah. So is there any before we wind up, do you want to I know you have a new book out. Do you want to talk about that at all? Anything?
Oh, I'd love to talk about my new book. It's yeah, it takes place in the 70s. It's crime fiction and it's really very much I do a police procedural and I'm very loyal to genre, but it touches upon a lot of the issues in the 70s. It takes place in Paterson, so
Hmm.
the impact of the Hurricane Carter case sort of hangs over the police department.
Hmm.
Actually doesn't very much hangs over the police department and their ability to interact with the community
Nice.
and do their investigation.
I grew up in Central Jersey, so I'm also so 1970s Patterson definitely piques my interest from that perspective. In
Yeah.
addition to just, I there's I think an interview that Lee sent me where I hadn't necessarily thought of it this way, but I think you sort of talk about Patterson as like kind of going through the same decline that like the Rust Belt, and I had never really thought of Patterson as a specifically Rust Belt city, but it was interesting kind of thinking of it in terms of going through some of the same things that a lot of cities just a little bit further west had experienced at about the same time.
It's funny because I actually had to look up the Rust Belt to see if Patterson was actually captured, if Rust Belt meant a physical location or just the general decline of northern cities, that were heavily involved in manufacturing. So
Yeah,
I think it does capture. But I did definitely had to look that up because yeah, I think when people think of the Rust Belt, they think of, middle America.
yeah. I have a lot of friends from northeastern Ohio, so I kind of like I Youngstown is especially a spot where that kind of comes to mind. But it's also like as someone who's driven from North Jersey to Youngs who drove from North Jersey to Youngstown not too long ago. It's not that long a drive. It's just getting on I-80 and making your way across.
Yeah, but you know what? To me, what's really interesting about Patterson is that even though it was in its decline, it was really a muse for a lot of artists. I mean, George Tice, who's a photographer, was doing an exhibit on Patterson in Manhattan
Hmm.
at the Metropolitan, the major art museum, and you had writers who were writing about Patterson. And I always find it so interesting is that it's this just basically this small industrial town and you
Yeah,
still have well, you had the film come out a couple of years ago.
yeah. And I mean the William Carlos Williams poem is just
Right.
a heck of a thing in and of itself. I'm happy to see, like, I think I read somewhere that there was the stadium that's being restored there, and I think they're getting a lower division soccer team, which like I'm also a huge nerd for soccer, so I'm happy to see, but I'm also just happy that like I'm happy to see some signs that it might be being, kind of getting a second wind because yeah, it's got a lot of history and it's as you said, been kind of a muse to a lot of people. And it would be nice to
Yeah,
see.
that Hinchcliffe Stadium was the home of the Negro Leagues, and they refurbished it, and now it's has a minor league team playing there.
Nice. Nice.
So it's doing well. So yeah, so my book comes out in June, and I'm very excited. Thank
Excellent.
you
I
for
will I
asking.
will let you know when this episode's up. Thanks so much for taking the time and thanks for recommending the film. I'm really glad you watched it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, and it was a good find for you.
Awesome.
And thanks for the conversation.
Thanks so much. And that was our discussion of The Front. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a rating and or review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also email us at framedandboundpodcast@gmail.com. And next episode, I'll be joined by Scott Adlerberg, and we will be discussing the Mario Vargas Llosa adaptation, Tune In Tomorrow, starring Peter Falk, Barbara Hershey, and a young Keanu Reeves. See you then.